Hi, I'm Asher Miller.
I'm Jason Bradford.
And I'm Rob Dietz. Welcome to Crazy Town, where we enjoy the day because there aren't many left. The topic of today's episode is humanity's detachment from nature. And please stay tuned for an interview with Kathleen Dean Moore. Jason, Asher, I want to tell you guys a little camping story. Is that all right?
Fun.
Is this like one of those scary ones you tell around the campfire?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Let's see how it goes. This took place in Northern California at Castle Crags State Park. You ever been there?
With you.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We went there one time together. Well, this is
Good memory, Rob.
This is not that time. This is this is another time. Beautiful place, right?
Gorgeous.
These spires rise up 1,000 feet, and really neat place for rock climbers. And the Pacific Crest Trail runs right through there. There's water and forest, and all this great stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, so one day I was traveling south, trying to get down to the Bay Area, and decided to stop there and camp. And I was with this friend of mine, and we actually got there kind of late, like 8 p.m. It was getting dark. And so we set up our tent, and while we're setting it up, this doe comes wandering in to camp, like 10 feet from me. And
no mom with it?
No, it's a doe. That is a mom.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's not a fawn, a doe.
A doe.
You
know how well I'm tied into nature.
It's how well-versed we are in nature. So I'm kind of like a dog when this happens. I just start chasing it because I can't just sit there and
So you're kind of a dick, is what you're saying.
I said a dog, okay, dog. So I chase it, and it runs like about 10 feet away and then just stops because it knows I'm absolutely zero threat. And it's just like browsing on the grass that's in this draw that kind of comes down
it
to our
graces
campsite.
on grass.
Yes. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So I ignore it, go back, finish setting up the tent. And me and my friend sat out at the picnic table and talked about whatever you talk about as the light goes away and whatever. We ran out of subjects and went to bed. Okay. So we go down to sleep in this tent, and my friend is like this notoriously deep sleeper. She just doesn't wake up when you're camping. I'm kind of a light sleeper. So middle of the night, I can't say exactly what time, I hear the worst scream I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, sat bolt upright in bed, like, what the fuck was that?
Right.
And in my mind, I was like, I think a deer just died.
Really?
And I've never heard a deer scream, but it was like in my mind, if it did, that's what it would sound like. And so I'm like sitting there, my heart is racing, and I turn my head so I can listen. I want to hear what's going on out there.
Right.
And I start hearing this dragging noise. And it's coming toward the tent. I hear this like scraping on the ground, like
towards you.
What?
And so I had this little camping knife, like maybe a 4 or 5 inch blade. I pull that out, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna start wrestling here. And I'm thinking it's a cougar, a mountain lion, is dragging a deer that it just killed towards my tent. And part of me, I wanted to go out and see it because I've always wanted to see one in the wild, but I wasn't sure that's what it was. And I thought, if that is what it is, it's probably stupid to get out and
it's not going to let you pet it or something.
Yeah, like while it's dragging the thing it just killed. So instead, I decided to make a noise to let it know I was there.
Right.
And so you want to hear the amazing mountain lion scaring noise I made?
It was big sobs that you had?
it goes like this. It goes, pshht. That was the noise. I don't know why.
You thought that was going to scare it off?
That's often a noise that
You're like, shh, we're in the library.
Yeah. Well, that's a noise that bird watchers use, like when they want to sort of get a response or get the birds moving in the tree or get it to vocalize. They'll make this noise. So I tried that on the mountain lion, and the dragging stopped when I made that noise. And then I heard the growl. That clearly was, yes, that is a mountain lion. Like it did the wow kind of thing.
Like the commercial for the Mercury or something like that? Car commercial from the 80s? I'm trying to bring you back to the 80s.
Right. Bring us out of nature.
That's your reference.
Into TV commercials.
Yeah.
So it made that growly noise. And so I just sat there for a while. And finally, my friend, she sat upright, finally. And I'm like, did you hear that noise? I think a deer just got killed by a mountain lion.
Like,
blah, blah.
I heard some...
And she just goes, huh, and just like falls back over to sleep.
You're
Meanwhile,
like lucid dreaming.
I'm like adrenaline spiked here, and it took me hours to get back to sleep. And what I wanted to tell you, besides the fun of the story, I wanted to tell you about the mindset that occurred after that.
Wait,
I had this.
First of all, was this true?
Oh, yeah,
Did you
yeah.
find out it
I
actually
guess
was?
I didn't finish. In the morning I thought, oh, let me go look for some blood or something. And then like 20 feet away is this deer carcass. It's got,
it was left behind.
oh yeah, it's got puncture.
Maybe you did scare it off.
I'm sure I did. So for any of you who experience a mountain lion that's threatening you, just make that noise. You know?
That's good advice, Rob. Yeah.
There is another story of a woman who had a mountain lion encounter, and she took out her phone and played some Metallica, and that scared it away.
Oh, that's awesome.
She should have done Barry Manilow. The thing would have run away for good.
Right. But it was there. Yeah, it had puncture wounds in its flanks,
Wow.
and its neck was broken. So I think what had happened is a mountain lion ambushed it from behind, grabbed it, bit its neck, and broke it.
And you think it's the same doe you saw earlier?
I think so, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. See, I should have chased it away a little harder.
Yeah.
If you're rooting for the doe. I mean, if you're
Right.
rooting for the mountain lion,
I
good
mean, it
deal.
needs to
Well,
eat.
Mountain Lion got screwed by you because he didn't even get the kill.
Well, I was wondering, mountain lions are really secretive. I was wondering if it was just hanging around watching
Waiting
in the
for it.
morning.
Oh, waiting,
Like,
yeah.
hey, that guy's messing with my kill. Now I'm going to kill him too.
Right.
But yeah, it put me in this pretty weird mindset for quite a while. At first, there was a lot of fear. Like I had this vision of mountain lions in my head all the time. I do a lot of solo bike riding and hiking and stuff, and just jogging in the woods, and I was often fixated on mountain lions
Right.
while I was doing that, and it was kind of weird. But the part that really interested me is that shifted over time away from fear and more towards awe.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of had this feeling like I had this chance at a connection with this mountain lion and with the deer and all, and kind of have this desire to expand on that connection. Like I'd love to figure out some way to follow mountain lion tracks, or figure out if you could,
So I think
see
you should
one.
just go out into the woods, slather yourself with deer blood or something like
Right.
that, and then you'll get your wish.
Right. Maybe put a deer hide over my head and like walk around out there. But no, I guess it made me realize there's this big world of connection to nature. I always felt some kind of kinship with nature, but it's clear that I was missing something there, that I didn't have anywhere near the depth of connection that I thought I had. And that's kind of what led into what we're talking about today, the hidden driver that's led us into Crazy Town, of the way that humanity is in this race, this rapid acceleration to wall itself off from nature.
Yeah, how far we've come in a pretty short time. I mean, if you think about it, for 99.99 whatever percent of our time as a species on this planet, we were not walled off from nature, right? We were at the whim of nature. In fact, probably prey for other species, and so our experience, I think, evolutionarily speaking, comes from being deeply embedded in nature. That's like a big part of us, and so it's actually a relatively recent phenomenon that some of us, I mean, I would say many of our listeners, people that are in kind of the world that we inhabit, are so disconnected from nature, but it hasn't been that way for
Not for that long.
Yeah,
that long.
It's really only the last few thousand years that we've taken to altering the crap out of ecosystems, building these urban places, killing off biodiversity, less and less time outdoors and all that, right?
I remember this experience. I was in a national park in Switzerland, and I remember going to this sort of park kiosk, and it was a list of the years that they last saw some major animal.
Oh, no.
And I was like, oh my gosh. So there's some parts of the world where killing off the megafauna happened sooner than others, and in some places where it was documented better than others. But I even remember, though, a lot of this was in the 1800s and early 20th century is when a lot of this last seen was. But I remember also being in graduate school and realizing that I was doing a lot of trips into Latin America for looking at forest ecology and exploration, and realizing that, it's really only since the 1950s that there became this rapid switch from most of the landscape was still wilderness to now there's these patches still remaining of wilderness.
Yeah.
It's switched from a world really still dominated, at least territorially, by forests that had never been logged, to now, you have to travel out of the city, down this big highway, through agricultural hinterlands to find the remaining wild places.
Yeah.
And that switch really only happened in the latter half of the 20th century for much of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that's exponential growth for you, right? Mm-hmm. That it would happen so rapidly, so quickly, and so much could be gone so fast because there's so many more of us consuming so much more stuff, and we've sort of created this globalized economic system that really has become very efficient at harvesting nature. But also, if you think about like the American psyche in some ways, European settlers coming here saw almost an infinite bounty. Right?
They didn't notice.
There wasn't a sense that in fact, nature was scary. And for much of our history, nature has been scary.
From the perspective of those who are living outside of nature in a sense of almost like a domesticated environment with farms and towns. But like you were pointing out, for most people, if they're hunter-gatherers,
right,
that was it.
There's nothing else.
They're not trying to escape from that or be afraid of it. It's more like, I'm going to hunt that deer.
And let's look at the relationships over this sort of deep history. Like hunter-gatherers, foragers, you are tied to your landscape. I mean, you may be mobile and sort of migrating across a large swath to follow the food or follow the seasons or whatever you need to do to survive. But everything that you do every day, you are really embedded and in relationship with nature. And then, we come along and figure out how to grow crops, cereal, grains, and we domesticate landscapes for our to be able to get food, and so that's a very different relationship with nature. Maybe Jason, you're the farmer. You can talk about that.
Well, what's interesting is we're also finding. I remember in these forest studies, and even in this area where we live now, the Willamette Valley, what kind of ecologists have discovered is that at the same time people were embedded in nature and embedded in the landscape of forest and meadows, they also modified it with fire, with selecting certain plants. And so there is tropical forests, for example, where they may cut the forest down, do some sort of planting for a while, but then what they do is they plant long-lived trees that in 20 years they can come back to and harvest the fruit from.
Yeah.
So fascinating, actually, somewhat modifying the landscape, becoming a little bit of an engineer here in this landscape, but so deeply connected at the same time.
Yeah, you bring up that point of like engineer, and I think that's where some of the mindset of trying to control nature comes into play, especially like think about water engineering projects like in the Nile Delta.
Well, we took it to another level, of course, with agriculture, where you simplified the landscape. Instead of creating this diverse landscape you're managing with fire, it's sort of soft management in a sense where processes are happening you're not controlling it directly, but you're kind of indirectly with tools. But then with agriculture, you're saying, no, I want this to grow and not everything else. And it needs more water to get better yield. So I'm going to divert a river with canals.
Yeah.
So we did a huge amount of that. And especially in dry climates like the Middle East, like the Nile Delta. And in dry climates, when you irrigate, you end up salinating. And so a lot of the civilizations that collapsed early on, the first agricultural civilizations collapsed because they basically destroyed their soils while they were trying to grow all their food.
Yeah, to me, I think it's important to just recognize that there have been these transitions over time, and agriculture has been with us for 10,000 years or whatever, and our relationship to nature changed pretty dramatically. And I would say probably for much of our history, there was an effort to try to control the environment on some level in order to survive. And in fact, we've seen the extinction of some megafauna as a result of human indigenous, we sometimes we tend to revere or kind of romanticize a little bit indigenous cultures, but there have been situations in the historical record where
big time.
We've actually rendered some species extinct because of our relationship with nature. But I think even in agriculture, and even up until this last century or so, and I'm talking again in our context, because for many people around the world, they still remain in a different context. But in our context, even until fairly recently, we had a sense of seasons.
Yeah.
Time was really connected with the cycle of the daily cycle of the sun. You know, it was like not until railroads that we actually had uniform time that people followed. And now we've created these artificial environments with electricity and lights, and we've taken it to a level now that is so disconnected from nature.
Yeah, I mean, just think about how you live day to day inside of four walls. Think about modern infrastructure. You know, you talk about water engineering projects, Jason, with a canal. Well, think about a giant hydroelectric dam, and, you know, something like that. Think about how we're embracing the information age and technology, and how, if you want, you can kind of live your life Ready Player One style, you know, where you're in your virtual reality bus or whatever it is, and in a suit. And
even while farming, you can probably be in these new tractors, and they've got like a virtual reality sort of scheme going on, auto driving for you.
Can we have a fundraiser, a share, so that we can get Jason a virtual reality farming gig?
Probably about $1 million you could set me up.
Yeah, that's not too much.
Well, I was thinking, I like what you said, Asher, about how it's transitions, and they're really important to think about. I was thinking about what's some kind of example that would look at these transitions in our relationship with nature, and I, for whatever reason, I came up with the idea of chicken.
That's a great example.
Chicken.
I'm following you in my head
okay,
right now.
Well,
what do you have to say?
See what you think. So,
okay.
In forager times, hunter-gatherer, you'd be out on the prairie and you would hunt a prairie chicken, and you would have to, figure out how to do that, what to use, how to stalk it, and then how to prep it, and you eat it.
Okay, well, the chicken we eat commercially now actually comes from like Indonesia, South India. But anyway.
Like a guinea fowl or something. But some kind of,
I get it.
Some kind of
wild
chicken-like bird.
Yes, wild bird.
That you hunt. And think of the things you have to know about your habitat and its habitat and all that. So compare that, you go through the transition to farming, where maybe you've got a flock of chickens and you're going to have one for dinner. You got to raise that chicken, so you still have to know something about it.
But you know what it is.
They're somewhat free range a little bit. They got a yard. They're kind of having chicken habitats that they can.
Yeah,
enjoy.
but
you control that habitat.
Yeah, you control it.
And think about how much more of a intimate relationship the hunter-gatherer has to his or her habitat than the farmer might have to this chicken habitat. Now think about you're in your Humvee.
Oh, I know my chicken environment really well, right? It's KFC.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. You're in your Humvee, you're driving through the drive-through, and you order a bucket of chicken-like substance. How much connection with nature do you have at that point?
And that was that was raised indoors. Like, your chicken has been in a full urban environment.
Your chicken is not even a natural substance.
Your chicken hasn't even been outside.
The acceleration of the walling off from nature of chickens.
Right.
It's a beakless, footless.
God.
And you can even go like to McDonald's and get your chicken nuggets, where they come with a plastic hamburglar that later gets stuck in some porpoise's blowhole because it.
And by the way, that chicken
ocean.
nugget is made from the parts of like 6,000 different chickens, right?
Yeah. Okay, that's depressing.
It is a little depressing, but you can see the levels of relationship with nature dwindling. Like, we're getting more and more disconnected, and it's almost like humanity seems to be in a race to do this and do it faster and faster.
And I think I'm going to sound like an old man now, but it does feel like it's gotten faster and faster. And it's so sad for me to think that this is where I sound like an old man. Not only does it seem like younger generations are more disconnected from nature than maybe we were as kids. And of course, the circumstances that we grow up in determine our access to nature, right? So I think all of us in our childhoods had some access to, if we're living in suburbia, some access to nature, when we were younger. So we could go out. I remember when I moved to the United States, I was living in a town in Massachusetts, and there was an acre of land behind my house.
Yeah, huge.
There were trees there.
Yeah.
We would sled through those trees, and we would bike through there, and we would go fishing sometimes, and my kids, part of the reason we chose to move to Oregon was to live in a place where we're fortunate enough to be able to do this, where our kids could actually be outside. My youngest son is walking on a path through when school was actually allowing the kids to go there, walking on a path through the trees to get to school. But so many kids these days don't have really that relationship with nature. And there are millions, hundreds of millions of people who live in urban environments now that not only have no interaction with nature at all, except maybe a tree at a park, they don't even see the stars at night.
Jeez.
You know?
What are stars?
Exactly.
They're like our sun, but far away.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I had the same kind of situation where I grew up in suburbia, and I would find these places, and I look back now, and they're kind of pathetic, degraded habitats.
like a stormwater ditch or something.
Well, I had a little BMX bike, and we would we would find these places where you could get through some fence.
You went to the landfill.
You get through some fence, and then you could drive, because this is in California, so the creeks would all dry out.
Yeah.
So you could ride your bike down one side and up the other. We made tracks all the time.
So you had a half pipe for your bike.
Yeah, we had half pipes, but of course there's shrubs and trees, and you just sort of enjoy it. And yeah, and it was full of trash. It was like washing machines and everything. It was just disgusting.
That sounds great, man. You're really selling this.
But it was interesting. It was like I really appreciated just even having that little bit of an escape and having the shade and this kind of wildness.
I'm the same. I mean, we used to go for picnic lunches in the summer when we were little kids and find a creek and
was
catch
this at
fish.
Stone Mountain so you could sit and bask in the glory of the Confederate assholes?
No. Well, I mean, I did grow up in Stone Mountain, Georgia, and around there, but we found some creeks with fish and with snakes, and we would wander around and follow the creek upstream as far as we could and stuff like that. But so, I mean, I have a nostalgia for that, and same as what you said, Asher, and I think, Jason, you saying, we wanted to live in a place like this because of the experiences we had as children. And something that came to mind similar from my reading, you know me, I can't handle adult level material. It's too
Faulkner for you.
Too difficult language.
Yeah, it's and too much time commitment. So I like reading kids' books.
Sure.
Just the ones with pictures, or
well, no,
words?
I had this kick for a while of going through the ones that won Newbery Awards.
Oh,
you know,
that's
so
great
books. But I realized there was this weird little blip in the late 50s, early 60s of books that had this huge nostalgia for nature. A book, My Side of the Mountain by Gene Craighead George, and Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell, and Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. You guys read any of those?
I read Where the Red Fern. I kind of cried.
Yeah. They're good books, and they're all centered around like a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old's nature experience. Where the red fern grows has a lot to do with dogs as well.
Yeah.
You're going to be okay,
Don't start crying, man.
But there's some kind of nostalgia thing going on at that point, too, for I think the way that kids weren't in nature nearly the way that they used to be.
Yeah. Well, what's it like now? They don't even know what to be nostalgic for.
Oh, well, I mean, there's this whole notion, like I was talking about earlier, about how 1950, say, Latin America versus 2020 is totally different in terms of how much forest is left. It's gone from 90% forest to 10% forest, let's say. I think that's what's also happening from generation to generation. There's less nature available. So what we had these drags in our backyards. And that was
you had the drags, all right? I had an actual creek with water in it.
Well, I had water in the winter, but this is California. I'm sorry. Yeah. You couldn't ride your bike up and down like
That's true. You had a far better BMX experience than I did.
But there's this notion from a guy, Daniel Pauly, about the shifting baseline, the idea that what we consider to be, normal and abundant, let's say, is what we experience as a child. And then as an adult, we're like, oh man, it's gone downhill from here. But if you ask someone from 100 years ago what their baseline was.
Yeah, they would think we were paupers.
Yeah, it was like, oh, you can step across the creek just walking on giant salmon backs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Now it's like, oh, I see a minnow. Ah!
Well, it's really interesting, that idea. I remember reading about the shifting baseline, and I think Daniel Pauly was a fish biologist, and basically he was lamenting the way that the oceans are being fished out. And you bring it up sort of like with a broader perspective on nature. I was thinking about it from the shifting baseline of technology. And in researching this topic, there's a pretty well-known book by a guy named Richard Louv. He wrote the book Last Child in the Woods. The subtitle is Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And he was writing in there kind of about this technological issue. And I want to share a quote with you guys from it. He says, Americans around my age, baby boomers or older, enjoyed a kind of free, natural play that seems, in the era of kid pagers, instant messaging, and Nintendo, like a quaint artifact.
Nintendo?
Kid pagers?
Yeah.
Talk about quaint.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he wrote this in like probably early 2000s,
Yeah.
right?
I got virtual reality games now, buddy boy.
I know, you think about like social media, like every kid's got a smartphone that's more powerful than
Yeah.
anything, that anybody
Kids
had.
pagers.
Beep, 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 beep.
So like think about that shifting base. Not only do we have the nature shifting baseline, we have the technology
Yes.
shifting baseline where
crazy.
kids are more and more embedded in this, I don't know what you call it, technosphere.
Well, and think about, that's where, again, bringing it back to exponential growth, the Moore's law, right, around the processing speed of chips, doubling every 18 months or whatever it is. Like, we've seen this acceleration in that kind of technology. And it is dramatic.
Yeah.
It really is dramatic within the lifetime of our kids, let alone our lifetimes. And it does feel like it's accelerating. And it is eroding, in a sense, connection to nature, amongst other things, connection to humans even.
Right.
Yeah. Well, if we're stuck in technology and we're walling ourselves off from nature and that's accelerating, I think we're even seeing it in the way we protect maybe our most pristine natural areas. You guys already know this about me. I'm a national parks geek. Maybe even more
You
so
have a
than
badge,
an 80s.
right? You have a National Parks geek badge?
Yeah,
I think?
yeah. It's actually a tattoo. So.
Oh, wow.
But you have this
Hardcore.
art in your house of like all the national park art.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think we went to the Grand Canyon when I was 12, and it blew me away. As well, it should.
Did you do it like in Vacation in the film? Do you remember that? I mean, you're
Yes.
an 80s. So you guys spent all this time driving there, and then you just stood there for 30 seconds, took a photo, and got out?
It's not that far from that. I was the only
Really?
one in my family that wanted to go down in there
Oh.
and see the river and stuff. But more time in the gift shop than than in the canyon. Sad. But no, the national parks. Ken Burns did a documentary on how it's America's best idea, and I agree. It's an amazing idea to set aside land and say we're not gonna mow this down. We're not gonna take timber out of it. We're not gonna mess with it. At the same time, you think about what we're doing. We wall off these places and say, that's the nature over there. Go there and see that. And I even was looking at our newest national parks. There's been quite a few that have been added since 2000. The Cuyahoga Valley, Congaree in South Carolina. There's 3 of them that are interesting to me. The Great Sand Dunes in Colorado, the Indiana Dunes in Indiana, and White Sands in New Mexico. They're all sand.
That's what we're left.
That's what's left,
preserving.
right.
Yeah, I used to work with a guy named Mike Scott at the U.S. Geological Survey who studied kind of broad-scale conservation, and his big conclusion was we are great at conserving rocks and ice, but this is good. Now we can add sand.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're progressing.
This is actually probably pretty smart to do that, because otherwise all the frackers are going to grab the sand and use it for fracking operations.
Right,
So
or
we
make some
better
more
preserve it.
drywall out of it or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, but you think about like we have to set up these boundaries, which is where nature resides, and then we can get in our campers and.
But that's the
visit
thing
it.
is, even when we go and visit them, right? It's sort of technologized. Our experience with nature is done through RV park camping, or even in our cars, we go off to places, we get out of the car, maybe we look around a little bit, or people take out snowmobiles, or they're hiking, on.
Jason almost just vomited when you mentioned snowmobiles.
Some of
Dune
these
buggies are better.
Yeah,
of these
dune buggies.
paths-
Let's ruin those sandy
Sand.
parks.
Some of these paths are paved to make it easier for people to walk on, and there's an ADA thing there, which
Sure.
I respect, and I think it's really important
It's
to
only
provide.
for Americans with disabilities. That's the American
Right.
disability. If you're a foreigner with a disability, then you're not allowed.
Exactly. So even that experience is not, again, I'm going to sound like a crotchety old guy, but is that really experiencing nature? And I'm guilty of this too. Going on hikes sometimes, I might stick my earbuds in and listen to a podcast.
You ever? I stayed when I was a kid. My grandparents took me to Yosemite a couple times. Like I don't know, I was 5 when I was 6, and we stayed in the Ahwahnee. Oh my God, that was incredible.
What, is that a lodge there?
The Ahwahnee is this luxury lodge. It is built in the lodge architecture. It was built in that era of the early 20th century.
Yeah, amazing.
It was freaking incredible. This dining hall and stuff. We're in the Yosemite National Park, but then I remember going later, and like in junior high, and I had to eat like at the Marriott kind of like cafeteria. It was horrific.
I just came up with a business idea based on what you said, Asher, with putting in your earbuds. So with this shifting baseline stuff, as the animals are all disappearing, what you'll do is you'll go to a place like Yosemite, you'll put in the earbuds, and it'll play animal noises and tell you what used to be there.
Right.
It'll be great. Like going to a museum.
You're thinking way too simply here. We need the VR.
Yes.
Oh, right.
So you're walking on this path. In fact, you don't even need to walk. It will just escort you like on an escalator.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you could see all the animals that should be there.
Like a cougar trying to attack you.
Right.
And in fact, you can go and experience all the national parks by going to some place in your little town at some strip mall where you just go inside with the VR goggles on your face.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fun. But I want to get serious again if we can.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I'm willing to go there. If you got something good.
Well, here's the thing: is you've brought some things up for me, and I've been thinking about how I grew up and what that told me about nature and my relationship. And it was kind of like almost thin, like I had to sort of find it myself in a sense. Like I didn't grow up in a culture that revered it or was telling me much about it. I go in my backyard and I take care of the doughboy pool. And
What does that mean? What the hell is a doughboy pool?
It's an above ground pool.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. So it's a cheap ass pool.
Why is it called that?
I don't. It's a brand.
Okay.
It's not like Pillsbury.
I thought it was like the shape you get in by swimming in it or something.
Right. So what's interesting though is even though that was my upbringing, I had enough experience. Like my grandparents taking me to Yosemite, and my uncle lived up in around Lake Tahoe, and I would go on hikes with him and camping. My first camping experience when I was 10 or 11. So I kind of knew I was really into this stuff, and even just seeing like tadpoles in the creek. So I majored in biology, and as I had this ability as an undergrad to go to Costa Rica, and for a whole quarter, all my classes were in Costa Rica. I was living there with other students, and we were living in this lodge, this new kind of, it wasn't very fancy, but it was this lodge right at the edge of this forest. And I would walk into the forest every day, just like outside, get breakfast and go do stuff related to classes. And I had this class where they taught us basic botany and taxonomy. So that was the ability to recognize plants and by their characteristics, give them names. It took me a while. At first I was like, this is hard. But as soon as like it had gelled, I remember this moment like about 4 weeks in where this gelled, and I started successfully figuring out what one plant was versus another. And suddenly this forest, which is hyper diverse, right? There's thousands of plant species. Suddenly I saw patterns. Instead of just seeing this wall of green stuff, I suddenly saw uniqueness everywhere and was able to distinguish and then see relationships. And it was that vocabulary combined with being told, look for this, look for that, look for the shape of the leaf, look for how the leaf is joining the stem, look for how the stem is attached, look for these little things called stipules, pay attention to its growth habit. All this stuff that I never even paid attention to, but I was taught. It was almost like I had not been taught that as a kid. It wasn't a culture, but I was now learning this culture of sort of science and ecology, and I was studying it from that perspective as like a 19-year-old.
Yeah, it's almost like
21-year-old maybe. I can't remember.
It's almost like a bit of a tearing down of the walls that you've been living behind.
Yeah, so it can happen. And what though when I got that the vocabulary and that kind of observational skills, suddenly like my connection to it just accelerated.
That's really interesting, because I want to explore that idea of the vocabulary and language for a sec, because I was listening to a podcast, again, in prep for this idea about nature and how we're being disconnected from it. The podcast is called Rewild Yourself, and it ran, I think, from 2014 to 2017. And in this episode, this guy who did the podcast, Daniel Vitalis, is interviewing another guy named Arthur Haynes, who he wanted to learn an indigenous language.
Wow.
Because he thought that, English is the language of the colonizer. And you would have a very different perspective if that's the language you know versus an indigenous language. And in that episode, he was talking about all these interesting ways in which it manifests. So one of them was like, okay, in English, you talk about rain, right? And it's a noun. It's the rain out there. Well, in the language he was studying, Passamaquoddy, the idea of rain is all verbs. It's all action. And there's like 50 different verbs that talk about what sort of raining action is happening. And so you think about, if it's all about nouns and the rain is a thing, it's almost like, oh, well, of course we can commoditize that. Whereas it's an action, it's something I'm in relation with. Totally different way of seeing the world. So maybe you were decolonizing yourself a little bit there, Jason.
That's an interesting perspective. I definitely...
Although the language that you were learning was probably...
Latin, right?
Latin.
Yeah. Well,
also a colonizer language.
No, they were nouns. They were now these plants that had names and recognizable features. But there's a difference between seeing it as just all this green stuff to seeing it as, oh, that's this family of plants.
Right.
And this individual is in the same family as this one over here. I can see how they're related to each other. And these tend to have flowers that are visited by butterflies. And isn't that cool?
Well, that's the piece, right? Because you're studying what happens ecologically.
Yeah.
How does everything interact? How does energy flow through the system?
But
You're
also,
seeing the patterns and relationships.
Yes.
Language is a key means for us to create memory,
Yes.
right? And to retain information, store information in our brains. So it'd be hard to imagine doing it without language.
Right. I realized how important language was.
But one of the things that Louvre pointed out in his book, Last Child in the Woods, is that language, yes, you're right, is how we interpret the world and tell each other things about it. But because of our disconnect, we've got the problem of like this atrophying of our other senses because we're so walled off. Like, think about how many stimuli there are in an outdoor setting versus in a library. I mean, there's a lot of books to read, but inside the walls of some interior room, a lot fewer stimuli, and certainly less for your nose and your eyes and your sense of taste.
I think that's important to understand, because we recreate visual stimuli very well, but the others we don't.
Right. Just get back to the language thing. I find really fascinating about verbs versus nouns. The other thing about verbs, I think, is when you think about rain in verb form, it's a recognition that it's constantly changing as well. There's motion, there's dynamism involved in it, whereas a noun could be very stagnant in a sense. And part of our disconnection from nature and what we've done in terms of our relationship with nature and trying to control it is to take away all the variability of it. And that comes at a huge cost, which is something I actually want to get at, because we were talking about sort of nostalgia, our nostalgia for kind of our childhoods when we had interaction with nature and that's sort of being lost. But I think it's a lot deeper than that, right? I mean, what are the kind of emotional, mental, kind of psychological, even physical tolls of being disconnected from nature?
Well, there's a ton of them. First off, I have to point out that in myself, I've got this goddamn colonized brain that, like, you're talking about verbs and nouns. I go to Schoolhouse Rock, the cartoons that played Saturday mornings in the 80s during when all the animated shows were on TV. And I'm singing in my head, verbs, that's what's happening. A noun's a person, place, or thing. It's so stupid. So stupid.
I remember reading this book, Gaviotis. You guys ever read that book? It's about this place in Colombia that's kind of in the lowlands, and they build this almost utopian.
Yeah, that's by Alan Weisman, right?
Well, they had this thing where they built a hospital, and the hospital had a retractable roof. And whenever the conditions were right, they retracted the roof.
Oh, interesting.
And so it let the patients, they're lying in this bed, see the sky, feel the air, smell everything from that was outside. And so apparently you heal faster.
Yeah.
And at night they could see the stars. They would open up and they just like stargaze.
I think Richard Louv, I know we keep referencing his writings, but I think he talked about how there's evidence with studies that,
yes,
being able to, like, what's out your window at a hospital, what you're even just looking at,
yes,
not even being in, but
right,
looking at, makes a difference in terms of people's recovery. I mean, you have all kinds of these really, really interesting studies.
I have a favorite 2 stats from that. One is they looked at Michigan inmates whose cells faced a prison courtyard. And those people had 24% more physical illnesses than those whose cells had a view of farmland.
Is that hold true in Illinois?
No, it's only in Michigan.
Okay.
All right.
There's just something about Michigan people.
The other one is that people who watch images of a natural landscape after a stressful experience, those folks calm down markedly in 5 minutes as measured by muscle tension, pulse, skin conductance, as compared to someone who didn't see a picture of something
and
natural.
That's just a picture.
That's just a picture. That's not even being in it.
So this is I'm gonna walk around with like some awesome calendar of the national parks and
pull it out.
Hold it up every time I feel
Fold it
anxious.
in your back pocket, like pull it out, unfold it.
Right.
Maybe this should be an experiment with the proverbial Karens out there who get mad and ask to speak to the manager at a store. All the employees should just be trained to like grab a nice, beautiful picture of nature.
Right.
Hold it up in front of their face, calm down.
Oh, that's huge. But there's all kinds of health effects where you have negative effects if you are away from nature, and positive effects if you're in it. Obesity is an epidemic problem now. Attention deficit problems. We've got more prescription of psychotropic drugs to people, especially children.
This evidence? I mean, it's just logical to say we as a species evolved. We became a species intimately connected to nature. And in a relatively short period of time, we've done all of these things to wall off nature, and now we're disconnected from it. Wouldn't you think that there would be some consequences, some impacts of that?
Don't try to get all rational on us here. I mean, this is crazy town.
It's just basic. I mean, I think it's just as simple as that. Of course, this is a problem for us, right? But I think we need to talk about, here we are. This podcast is Crazy Town. We're talking about these huge forces that are driving us over the edge of the cliff, in terms of like a real existential threat to humanity and other species on this planet. So I think it's worth really talking about, well, how does this sort of relationship with nature or the lack thereof pertain to that, And for me, I think there's a few things there. One is probably that we would argue that getting reconnected to nature and understanding nature's flows, being in relationship with nature is not just psychologically, emotionally, physically better for us, but because of the physical limits of the planet to support the way we function, we have to change that, right? We have to simplify, reduce, get back into living within ecological bounds. Mm-hmm. That means we have to be connected to nature in order to understand how to do that, right? Yeah. So that's like to me, sort of a given. But the other thing is that nature's remarkable, and nature provides incredible, probably the only areas of solution, quote unquote solution, that I would have any hope in terms of how to deal with sequestering carbon and these other kinds of things. But if we don't value nature, if we don't really, really value it, we are going to continue to be on this course where we basically will, we're maybe in the Wile E. Coyote moment right now, but we'll realize we're off the edge of the cliff.
It reminds me a little bit of like these forest bathing studies, what you're talking about, because you can turn them either way, right? And I think there's probably there's a way to use this that's both potentially like commercial and then it going towards more like, just double down on some sort of technological substitute. Or there's a way to look at this that says, no, we really have to turn towards using nature and valuing it and connecting with it. So you guys familiar with these a little bit?
Forest bathing?
Forest bathing. So maybe we're talking about like...
Is that going in the woods?
Yeah.
Because, I guess
Why can't it just be called going into the woods?
Yeah.
I think forest bathing, I of course imagine somebody like in some kind of like there's a waterfall and they're bathing, in this little pool.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. It's a Japanese phrase, so maybe the translations, but so these Japanese researchers figured out that when people walk into the forest, it lowers a lot of the stress responses, cortisol levels and blood pressure and heart and breathing rate, whatever. But of course, it's science, so they got to figure out, well, why? Well, they narrowed it down to exposure to a terpene in the air.
Is that like a pterodactyl?
Yes, it's a tiny pterodactyl.
You thought pterodactyl, I thought turpentine.
Right.
Well, terpenes are phytochemicals.
Cher, put down the turpentine. Stop huffing it.
Terpenes is a large class of phytochemicals. So phyto means plant, chemical plant. They're made by plants. And if you walk through a forest and you smell, you're usually smelling terpenes. So you ever go smell like some of the trees out, like the ponderosa pines or Jeffrey, they smell like vanilla?
Yeah.
That's a terpene.
I was thinking butterscotch.
Butterscotch, it's a terpene. Like linalool is a terpene in lavender.
So like those cheap Halloween candies you get, that's just as good as breathing in the forest.
Well, this is the thing that's interesting is like they are able to recreate the results of these people walking in the forest by putting in a motel room and injecting pinene scent into the room. Oh. So there's something to be said for artificially getting these chemicals, right? Like that's why you take like Epsom salt baths that have stuff that calm your chamomile tea. You're in your little cubby of a home, but you're bringing these chemicals in. But it's...
All right, wait, I take it back, Cher. Start huffing the turpentine.
I'm not sure that's the kind of chemical you were referring to, Jason.
But it gets, to me, what's interesting is it gets at the biochemistry and that we evolved in a relationship with the environment where our body isn't healthy.
Because we cut off from those things.
Our body actually needs interaction with all these phytochemicals to actually maintain levels of stress, levels of relaxation, levels of mental clarity.
How interesting would it be if here I was just thinking about like food diet, right?
Yeah.
And all the education people do around you need this much protein, carbohydrates, blah 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 blah. Imagine if like your diet included that.
Right.
Exposure to these kinds of chemicals in nature.
Well, you could almost people will package diet programs up like Weight Watcher and ship you 12 weeks. Yeah, you could be shipped like here's 12 weeks of the right chemicals you need to inhale.
Now it's my turn to start crying. Okay,
let's not do that.
Can we not do that?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I would rather not go that route. I would rather us say, what's a lot cheaper and easier and non-commodified way to do this? Is to just take some walks in a place that has trees.
Well,
I
think that idea of it's healthy, as you were kind of alluding to, Cher, it's pretty commonsensical to say, like, of course, being in the habitat in which we evolved is good for us. Breathing air that's clean but has the chemicals that we evolved under is good for you. I totally get that. One of the big takeaways for me in looking into this is like, if you don't have some kind of meaningful, depthful relationship with nature, you don't love it, how could you possibly care for it? And why would you not exploit it and undermine it? And of course, when you undermine the habitat that you live in, you're at least at some point in the future, if not immediately, you're undermining yourself.
I gotta say, guys, it makes me really sad to think about. We were talking about our nostalgia, sort of the overall disconnection that humanity has been undergoing. But think about not only younger generations who are experiencing less, than previous generations, but all of those kids, all of those people that live in these urban environments. You're talking about the smell. Yeah. We know what you meant when you were talking about
diesel
these smells.
Diesel doesn't cut it, by the way.
Yeah, but there's an inequality aspect of this that is really heartbreaking to me, because there are kids, there are people, disproportionately people that are poorer, that are people of color who have never been afforded the opportunity to have that connection, don't know what those smells even are.
Right.
And in fact, they're being exposed to the exact worst chemicals that they could be exposed to. They're on the front lines of all the shit that we're producing in these urban environments. It's so when we're thinking about reconnecting to nature, can we start with the front of the line of people who never had any connection to nature?
I want to whiplash you for a second and try to shift you from sadness to anger.
Oh, that's easy.
Because
Easy.
when you think about people without connection to nature and how they can get an exploitative mindset, and how that's what's led us into this overshoot situation, one of the hidden drivers that's led us into the overshoot situation that humanity faces. I recently came across just an awesome example that I'm sure the two of you are really going to enjoy.
Okay.
So Harvard-educated Matthew Iglesias, he's one of the co-founders of Vox.com. So he's not one of these people, at least I don't know his history, but I assume he's got some money and some resources. What he wrote recently was a book that I think is born out of his lack of connection to nature. He wrote a book called 1 Billion Americans.
Oh, right. We talked about
The
this
Case
before.
for Thinking Bigger.
God damn it.
So this guy, if you go into his book, there's a great little passage in there where he writes...
You did this?
Yeah, I didn't get the book. I was able to get a little sample online.
Okay,
He says... He writes, I am not personally a nature lover or an outdoorsy person, but for those who are, it's worth emphasizing that an expanded population need not come at the expense of wilderness or outdoor recreations. He goes on, he talks about how a higher population might mean higher CO2 emissions, but that's okay. There's more of us, and we'll engineer a way out of that problem.
you.
Oh, God. It's the whole idea.
you.
It's like a Julian Simon sort of like Simon-esque, like the ultimate resource is the human mind.
Yeah, but
To
it's...
say with a straight face, we can have 1 billion people in the United States and there will be no impact on nature?
Yeah, well, and it's just telling that, he's
He's
four-wall
clearly
urbanite.
disconnected from nature,
Yeah,
this
right.
guy.
And I don't mean to, rail on the guy. He's probably an okay person. But...
No, you can rail on him
Yeah,
because you know what? He spent time writing a book, and you'd think that he's done a little bit of thinking and research in writing that book, and to come to a conclusion that it's not even being ignorant of it. It's saying, I've looked at this, and I think there's no problem.
Yeah.
Right.
And you know what? Fuck you, you're wrong.
Right.
All right, well, time to double down on the anger, because I got another guy and another book for you. I read a book called Naked Economics, and the author was this guy, Charles Whelan, and he's a lover of neoliberal capitalism.
Great. What? This guy, are you just a glutton for punishment,
What are
Rob?
you doing?
You got to know all sides of the story, okay?
Fair enough.
So he wrote this little vignette in the book about, it was kind of the intro of the idea of the book, is like, imagine you're in a cafe in Paris and you eat a tuna sandwich and it's really wonderful. And he talks about, think about if you had to orchestrate how that sandwich got to your plate. Like you would have to be in the ocean and do the fishing, and then you'd have to cut it up and you'd have to blah, all this stuff. So this
Bake
tuna
the
from the
bread.
South
It's
Pacific.
easier than making a toaster.
Right, it is. But he basically goes through, it's like the magic of the market.
Right.
Right.
I've heard this before.
And, to some degree, I get it. That's fine. But you don't have to do any research at all, really, to then go look at his Pacific tuna and realize this is a species that's been fished out. I mean, they're now rare. They had to close down the fishery. So again, if you have no connection, no reverence with nature, it's easy to commodify it.
Not only that, but you don't give a shit about other people too, because that tuna is not going to be there for future generations. Yeah. And how many people get to go to Paris and eat a fucking tuna fish sandwich? Do you know what I mean? It's like...
I hate this whole... So there's a difference in economic thought between... The dominant is that we should price everything and just accept the market. This is the dominant thought. If we put prices on nature, and they're good prices, we know enough to figure out how to put the right price on, that the market will then adjust.
Yosemite, $1.99.
Right.
Yellowstone, $2.99. Buy two, get a third free, especially if it's made of sand.
So this mindset of this last guy, the tuna fella, pisses me off because, the market's just going to gobble up everything, right? But the idea with some people say, okay, if we commodify it, if we put a price on it and the price is high enough, it will discourage consumption. So the way to discourage consumption in their mind is put a price on stuff that I consider sacred. It's like, no. You cannot eat my child. My child has a high price on it.
Exactly.
Okay, I know it's a tender human. Okay, the ribs are spectacular.
Come on, there's a price. Like, what is it? Like $1,200,
Right.
$13. Come on, you'd sell.
Depends on the day.
But this is the thing. It's like you can really easily go to examples. You're like, oh no, that is taboo.
Oh,
we would never put a price on that.
Your child didn't do the dishes. The price just dropped.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah. We can do a spot market. So I just kind of, this is, I think, though, the fact, like we're talking about language and the culture we're raising, where everything is for sale, everything's commodified.
But to me, it's not the tuna fish guy. It's people who are actually kind of part of our collective tribe who are wanting to actually address these.
Well, even
these
Nordhaus,
issues.
for example.
Even ecological economists.
But it's not
have
even
done
just
it.
Nordhaus who we picked
Right.
on a lot, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there are other people that are not economists.
No.
They're environmentalists.
Yes.
And they
fall into it.
see this rapacious, capitalist, exploitative, extractive system gobbling up nature. And they know that they want to protect nature. They love nature. They love species in nature and biodiversity. And they see the role that nature plays in addressing the climate crisis. Like all their motivations, their reasoning is coming from the right place. And they're desperate to figure out a way of solving this problem, knowing that they're coming up against a machine.
Yeah.
Right? That is this, it doesn't even have a head on it. It's got,
Right.
It's got billions of heads on it. And so you understand the rationale of saying, well, God, if we just put a price on carbon, we can actually get the market to like respect nature. But I think what you're pointing out here is in doing that, we continue to think that nature is there for us to control. And as long as we have that mindset, we'll never, ever truly figure out how to live sustainably on this planet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, I think we have to think of it more of like sacredness and taboos.
That there is no price on this.
Yeah, that's like your baby. Are you going to sell your baby? No, you wouldn't. You have to think about that for nature. Like there are things we should just never do because if we do them, they're so morally reprehensible. But the problem is, it's almost like the problem is our culture is so broken that it doesn't understand what is morally reprehensible, right? It doesn't understand that. It thinks, it just imagines that you can solve the most glaring, obscene, terrifying problem we've ever faced, which is the complete collapse of our civilization and destruction of the biosphere, setting back, evolutionary progress or whatever I even call evolutionary history, millions of years of loss of species diversity and ecosystem destruction. We think we can solve that by just like tweaking the price of the stuff that we're like funneling through the industrial maw. It's just bogus.
I think, and I guess we'll get to this when we talk about do the opposite. I think a lot of this comes down to humility, and humility can come from being in nature. I had an experience where I nearly drowned in a river. I was jumping off these rocks in a river in Colorado, and I just didn't realize how powerful. This was in the summer, and the river was flowing fast. I just didn't realize how powerful it was until I landed in, and I was like, "Oh shit!" And I just got swept down river, and I was taken into another huge rock and just sucked down pinned against the bottom of the rock at the bottom of the river. And in that moment, I thought I was going to die. I was so awed by how powerful this little river was.
Yeah.
And so maybe all of these people who are trying to set this policy, these agendas for us.
Throw them in a river.
Let's throw them in a river and see what they think.
I love it.
Stay tuned for our George Costanza Memorial Do the Opposite segment, where we discuss things we can do to get the hell out of Crazy Town.
You don't have to just listen to the three of us blather on anymore.
We've actually invited someone intelligent on the program to provide inspiration. Hey, do you guys ever have trouble finding podcasts that you like?
I just listen to ours.
Yeah, no. What other podcasts are there?
Well, that's actually what I wanted to talk about is another podcast that's sort of cut from the same cloth as Crazy Town.
Well, I should check it out.
Yeah.
Soiled, stinky, that kind of thing.
Well, I don't think they talk about poop as much as us.
Burlap, is that the cloth?
They talk about environmental topics, and they got a sense of humor.
Oh.
It's called Sustainababble.
Clever.
And yeah, it is clever.
Yeah, I've actually listened to it.
And
it's pretty good.
there's two guys, Dave and Ollie, and they work for nonprofits in the UK, and kind of as a labor of love, they record and produce Sustainababble.
Now, the other thing is they have British accent.
They're kind of like us, but they sound smarter.
Yeah, they're smarter than us.
Yeah.
Wow, low bar if all you got to do is be smarter than us. But please, yeah, go check out Sustainababble.
Every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong. My life is the complete opposite of everything I want it to be.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
So we've been talking about how our culture, our language, our desire to price everything, commodify everything, how that ends up making us overexploit nature and not have a very healthy relationship with it. So what the hell can we do that's the opposite?
I mean, it's going to sound really overly simplistic and kind of stupid, but pretty important. And
We're used to that with you, though.
Yeah. Get out of nature. Actually go out and get out of nature. Now, everyone's situation is different. For some people, it's literally going out the door, the back door, front door, whatever. For other people, it's a serious effort. So, circumstances will dictate how often you can do that. But I would say for everyone listening, challenge yourself to go out and really immerse yourself in nature. Go bathe in the forest.
Yes. And, the thing is that, like you're saying, not everyone has as easy access. So if you want to step up and make it easier for others to have access, maybe think about supporting your local public parks or local land trusts, which do a good job of trying to locate access to nature to as many people as they can. So there's always the ability to get involved, whether it's with a nonprofit or with a public organization. So that's really good.
And if you have the means to do so, support programs that help kids get out in nature, particularly kids that are under-resourced, don't have the access to nature themselves, urban kids.
Yeah. I've had some friends do that, like out of college,
Yeah, you have one sitting right here. When I finished grad school, I was a teacher at an Upward Bound program, which is taking students who are the first in their family to go to college or who meet a kind of an low income level requirement. All these kids came to a university campus that was near the Great Smoky Mountains, and we went out and did field ecology research and taught them stuff. And some of them, this was the first time they were getting out into the woods like that.
And like a lot of like 6th grade or 8th grade programs from schools, they have a week where they take the kids the class somewhere. So is that happening in your community? If so, can you make sure it's doing a good job? It's well supported. If not, can you develop something like that? So that's another way to do that is, get it through the schools even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are cool. I think a little bit harder challenge, and one that we were, I think, starting to allude to, is that we've got to get out of this colonizer mindset and this exploitative relationship with nature and try to, in some ways, think more indigenously. And I don't want to pretend like I'm someone who's knowledgeable in this realm. What have I done? I've read some books, and we've all, the three of us have sit here and make fun of how colonized my brain is by all
You're
kinds
colonized
of,
by the 1980s.
Yes. Yes.
So much crap that some TV screen told me to do and be. But lately I've been kind of fascinated by some of the writings I've seen on what it means to decolonize and how to think more indigenously. And I wanted to maybe finish things up here with a quote out of a book called Sacred Instructions. And it's a book by one of the friends of the Post-Carbon Institute, Sherry Mitchell. You've actually interviewed her in the past, Cher.
She's one of my favorite people.
Yeah. So before I read this, I got to ask for pardons for butchering the pronunciation of some of the words that she uses from her language. And it's a little longer than the typical quote, but I think it's really worth thinking about some of the things that she has to say.
And maybe we should end it on this note.
Let's do it.
All right, so here's what Sherry Mitchell says at the beginning of chapter 16 in Sacred Instructions. Skejanawe Bamusawakan is the way of life that is held by my people, the Pinawapskek, and the other tribes within the Wabanaki Confederacy. This way of life is about living close to the earth, close to our kin, and remaining ever mindful of our responsibilities to the sacred agreements that we have with every living being. It is about the sustainability of the earth, our relationships, and our spiritual connections. Xiye means harmony with the natural world. It is not enough to know that we are part of one living system. We must also take active steps to live in harmony with the rest of creation. This means that we cannot adopt attitudes or beliefs that place us above the natural world. We cannot see ourselves as having dominion over the land, the water, or the animals. We can't even see ourselves as being stewards of the earth. We are only keepers of a way of life that is in harmony with the earth. Every day, we must act in ways that acknowledge that we are part of one living system, a unified whole. Kathleen Dean Moore is a writer, philosopher, and environmental thought leader. She is a professor emerita at Oregon State University and co-founded the Spring Creek Project for Ideas, Nature, and the Written Word. She's written and edited a bunch of wonderful books. Her most recent is Earth's Wild Music, celebrating and defending the songs of the natural world. And I'm happy to call her a friend. Kathleen, welcome to Crazy Town.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Jason, Cher, and I have just been discussing how humanity seems hell-bent on distancing itself from nature and how that distance enables us to undermine ecosystems. And of course, when we do that, we undermine ourselves. But it doesn't have to be that way. You've written beautifully about how people can have deeply fulfilling relationships with nature. Can you describe your views on humanity's relationship with nature?
I can try. You know, the person I am led by and inspired by is a tribal elder whose name is Jack Forbes. And he points out how odd the notion is that we might in any way be separated from nature. He says, you could cut off my hands, you could cut off my ears, you could cut off both of my legs and I would still live. But if you cut off the air, I would die. If you cut off the water, I would die. So why do we think that our ears and our hands and our legs are more a part of us than the natural world? So we feel ourselves better than the rest of creation. We feel ourselves separate from it. We feel ourselves immune from its laws, and that's very convenient. Obviously, Al Gore talks about inconvenient truths, but we should talk a lot about our convenient lies, the lies we tell ourselves about how separate we are from the earth. So if we want to destroy forests wholesale, if we want to grind the hindquarters of animals into patties and eat them, if we want to wring the last oil and gas from the earth, it's very convenient to think of ourselves as separate from the earth and immune from any kind of consequences. Or to think that if we do have consequences, we can foist them off on poor people in our country or in the Southern Hemisphere or on future generations, worst of all. So we need to do what you quoted that beautiful Sherry Mitchell as saying, is that we need to find ourselves as keepers of a way of life that's in harmony with the earth. But we should understand how absolutely radical that idea is and how revolutionary it is, how much it would undermine, completely cut the stilts out of the extractive economy.
Yeah, wow. It's so many thoughts are going through my head right now. Probably the most important is this idea that we've got to end our supremacy viewpoint, this story that we're above everything. I've been feeling that more and more as I speak to people like you and Sherry and others. A big part of that is what stories we teach our children. And again, the three of us, Jason, Asher, and I, talked about how children face what's called the shifting baseline. And they're facing this in two ways. One is that children experience our depleted natural world, the one we've already exploited in the ways you were talking about. And they think that's the way things are supposed to be. And then at the same time, they're experiencing all of this technology. They're so embedded in it and in this materialist economy that they think that's how things are supposed to be. So if we're going to restructure the economy, rebalance, get a much more holistic way of living, how do you see us doing that, resetting the baseline with children?
Yeah, that's a really, really tough one. I mean, have you ever seen a landscape that hasn't been degraded? Ever? Have you ever?
Not once. I mean, you think you have, and then you go back and hear from older people or see older photos, and then you understand how what you thought was abundance isn't even close.
That's right. Yeah. And the situation we find ourselves in that's different from people who came before and people who have come after is the rapidity of the loss. So that, in the 50 years that I've been writing about the natural world, the world has lost 60% of individual plants and animals. They've been wiped off the face of the earth in the time I've been writing about them. And the population of North American birds is down by a third. Half of the grassland birds are lost. Half of the butterflies are lost. And the difference is that we remember. We have lived through this. It has happened so quickly. We have done it so quickly that we can remember what used to be. And of course, that's not the case for the children. And of course, they have this sliding baseline of ecosystem thriving, and that's really worrisome. They can walk into a tree farm and think it's a forest. I've seen children play on the most extraordinary stumps and never raise their eyes to see the missing tree. I think that what we have then is the sliding baseline of ecosystem thriving, and then the sliding baseline of our expectations of ourselves as caretakers. And then we have a sliding baseline of imagination. Can we even imagine a thriving, life-drenched world? And then that's the end of our sliding baseline of hope. So I think about this in regard to my own grandchildren. I think about this, what can we do, as your question asked? And I wonder if maybe the only thing we can do for the children is to help them devote their lives to the restoration of a healthy ecocultural landscape. As they say, build it back better. Maybe if a child plants a tree, that child can imagine a forest. And maybe if we help the child plant a huckleberry bush, maybe that child can imagine a hummingbird. So giving the children opportunities to be part of recreating a whole, I think, is probably our best chance.
I really appreciate that and agree completely. I've often thought sometimes it feels futile going out and fighting this huge force that's overly exploiting the planet and this mass of humanity and the economy and what can you do? But those kinds of actions, planting a tree, getting out in even if it's just the backyard and seeing what happens. Yeah, I think that's beautiful.
When you feel hopeless about the possibility of change as against this huge flow, you should go to this little town in Oregon that's called Lancaster. Maybe you have been to Lancaster.
I haven't.
It's just this little town in the middle of wheat fields. And it used to be a river town. It was the center of the agricultural area and the head of steamboat shipping, and they used to ship out all these products down to Portland on the steamboats. That town is now 1.5 or 2 miles, or maybe even 3 miles away from the river. And it happened overnight. And it happened because of a flood. So it was the force of the river that actually changed its course. And what happened was that there was a flood that was ripping out the cottonwoods. And the force of the river was carrying those cottonwoods down until they lodged against the shore or something. And more of them piled up. And of course, as you start blocking a river, you slow its flow and it stops dropping its load. And so the river itself, that force of the river, blocked the river, and it leapt in one movement 2.5 miles away. So I've been thinking about that. I don't want to go too far off subject, but all we need to do is start to slow that river. We don't have to stop it. We just have to jam it up all over the place. And the river will do the work of stopping itself.
I leave it to you, of course, to find a beautiful nature metaphor to describe what we need to do as humans.
Yeah, well, one little obstruction to profits, or one little deflection in complacency, one blockage to business as usual. All of us need to find our stone or our tree and chuck it in, and the force of the river will turn it in a different direction.
Yeah, it's funny. One of your books is titled River Walking, but here you're talking about river leaping.
Exactly.
Speaking of books, too, I want to turn to your most recent one, which is Earth's Wild Music. And that's about wild songs and the majestic creatures who sing them. Your writing in it can strike two very different chords. You've got a celebratory chord and you've got a sorrowful chord. But overall, the book's a call to defend nature and the music of the natural world. And that theme is right in line with work I've seen you doing to find the connection between nature and the art that we humans produce. Can you talk about art as a gateway to nature conservation and deepening our relationship with nature?
I'm happy to. This writing of this book, Earth's Wild Music, has been a great, great joy for me. At the same time, it has brought me into contact with facts that are just impossible to hold these days. Mary Oliver, the poet Mary Oliver, a writer, wrote, "My work is loving the world, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished, which is mostly rejoicing, which is gratitude." But not anymore. Celebration isn't enough. And the person who's going to write about the natural world has to find a way to open people's hearts without breaking them. Maybe crack them a bit to let the light in, as Leonard Cohen says. So how do you do that? I think you do it with art, with literature, with music, with visual art. And here's my metaphor. This is not a river metaphor, Rob. This takes you back to a cave. And here you have Medusa. Remember that Greek goddess whose hair was so awful and whose appearance and countenance was so fearsome that when people looked at her, they would turn to stone. They were paralyzed. They were unable to act. And I think that's the situation we find ourselves in right now. If people look directly at the climate crisis, at the extinction crisis, at ecosystem collapse, they are paralyzed. So many things coming at them. So many snakes that they're turned to stone. But what happened with Medusa is that here came the great Theseus with his magic sword and his shield. And he held his reflective shield up to Medusa so that he could look into his shield and see a reflection of her horror. And then using that image, he reached out with his magic sword and cut off her head. That's the work of art, is to provide a reflection of the horror so that people are able to look on it without being turned to stone, so that they are released from their horror and they're able to see in a different way. They're able to reflect on what we have, and in that they would be then empowered and open to change. So I look everywhere I can for these reflective shields. And right now I'm working with music because I think music is a way to take an emotion straight into, or information straight into the heart. So, for example, we've been creating these tiny concerts, and they're so much fun. Each one of them is 4 minutes long. Each of them has a wonderful poet or writer reading a selection from Earth's Wild Music about a particular animal, and accompanied by a live performance from a musician. So, for example, Robin Kimmerer, the beautiful author of Braiding Sweetgrass, reads a piece on the common myrrh and is accompanied by two youth a cellist and a violinist. And so we've got these up on YouTube. You can Google Spring Creek Project and you'll find them all. There are 20 of them. In each case, your mind, your heart will be opened to the glory of this animal, and you will come away also understanding how horribly imperiled they are. So there's just an example of what we're trying to do with music.
Yeah, wow, that is inspiring. And I, from my past working in conservation biology, I have to say it's a lot more inspiring than just running through a list of the the imminent extinctions or the all of the problems with the habitat. That's tends to be what happens when you put a bunch of conservation biologists in a room, but not often that you key in on the beauty, the music of it all. And so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, we live on a singing planet. Yeah. We can't let the music die.
Well, I don't want to get overly personal, but I was wondering if you could share with our listeners something that you've done, and obviously you've done a lot and thought a lot about this, but I was wondering if you could maybe come up with a story or something that you've done at some point in your life that deepened your connection to nature, or maybe just made you realize something about your place in all of this.
Yeah, right. I could talk about the Galapagos Islands underwater. I could talk about Glacier Bay, but let's not. Let's talk about my backyard, okay? Because I live on College Hill in a town of 65,000 people. My house is crammed onto a lot that's 50 feet by 100 feet. So my backyard is it's just a dumb little backyard, about 30 feet by 20 feet. And for the longest time, it was lawn. It was soccer nets. It was a swing. It was sprinkler heads. It was fringe of petunias. But when the children went off to college, we tore it all out, everything. And we started planting native plants. It was so much fun. Milkweed, wild azalea, bleeding hearts, salal, huckleberries, hemlocks, vine maples, all crammed into this. And by now, maybe 5-6 years later, we have a real forest. It's tiny. It's a native forest. And it's a blizzard of birds. It's proof of the old adage that if you build it, they will come. There are birds out there. There are animals. There are butterflies. There are other kind of insects that are looking for a remnant, even if it's a recreated remnant of the world that they evolved in. They can't live in lawns, but they can live in these little patches. So it's made us happy. We can sit in that little forest, that tiny forest, and feel that we're in a spray of confetti of birds, like a celebration after the Super Bowl. It is so full of life. And I was reading that there's been this big mega study of what makes people happy. And they say, number one, there's 3 things. Number 1 is sleep. I wouldn't have thought of that, but that's what it is. Number 1 is adequate sleep. Number 2 is gratitude. And number 3 is doing something for others. So it shouldn't make me surprised that this little tiny forest is making us happy, because it involves giving back, reciprocity, trying to recreate something that has been a gift to you. And it involves trying in a tangible way to make something whole that had been torn apart. There should be a sanctuary movement everywhere. People are talking now about making 30% of the planet into animal habitat and remaking it. I know E.O. Wilson is talking about half Earth, 50% of the Earth. We can do that. That's where we have to go. We have to stop the harm, we have to stop the killing, and we have to build back the places of wildness and life fulfillment.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. Kathleen Dean Moore is the author of Earth's Wild Music. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I want to say thanks for joining me here in Crazy Town.
You are doing good work, Rob. Thanks for the opportunity to chat.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Crazy Town.
Yeah, if by some miracle you actually got something out of it, please take a minute and give us a positive rating or leave a review at your preferred podcast app.
And thanks to all our listeners, supporters, and volunteers. And special thanks to our producer, Melody Travers.
You know, one of my side gigs is to try to find sponsors for the podcast.
Yeah.
And I had a hard time because every time I let people know that the show was about not putting a price on nature, nobody wanted to sponsor it.
I know. You passed the buck on to me, and I was talking to all kinds of people. Like, what, you're like decommodification? Are you a communist or what's going on? I mean, I just got a lot of blowback from all potential sponsors.
You couldn't get Exxon or DuPont or somebody like that to sponsor?
Nobody wanted to touch this. I'm like, we can greenwash it. I mean, we can do our best.
Yeah.
But no, it was...
Well, maybe like Sesame Street, this episode is brought to you by the letter N and the number 2.
Okay, what is that? What are you getting at?
Well, maybe we just can't find a sponsor, so this can just be brought to you by nature.
Sounds good.
That sounds good. Crazy town, da 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 da, crazy town.